You've done your research, and now you've decided you're ready to move abroad. Now it's time to decide on a long-term accommodations. Should you rent or should you buy? Let's talk about it. Greetings, fellow Globetrotters. Today, our episode is all about turning your dreams into reality. Whether you're considering renting an apartment or becoming a property owner, I've got your back. Stay tuned for some invaluable special bonuses at the end of the video. Before we dive in to talking about the real estate in your host country, let's talk about finances. It is key to understanding your finances from the beginning. I don't recommend that you pour all of your savings into a property in a foreign country. The reason why I say that is because there's a lot of factors that can affect that property, whether it's economics, the government changes to foreigners residing in that country. There's a lot of factors that you need to consider before you take all of your savings and dump it into a property. I suggest that you sit down with your financial advisor and discuss your plans and ask for his or her input as to best ways to utilize those funds. Although we commonly think that property ownership is a strong value, it can also be a hindrance. It doesn't always work out the way you are accustomed to, especially if you're from the United States. If you're considering owning property in your host country for the sake of earning a citizenship, then that's a different factor. But just be aware that those rules and regulations on property ownership granting you citizenship can change. Know those consequences and be okay with it if that's your game plan. Let's begin with real estate agents. These are key people that are going to help you through this process of owning a property or renting a property. You need to seek out your expat groups and ask for recommendations of a reliable, someone that speaks your language, real estate agent that can help you with this process. There's many online platforms that you can go to find listings, but unlike the United States where you have a master list, an MLS listing, and everyone can see properties all across the city, it doesn't quite work the same in foreign countries. Most real estate agents only share or show listings that are either with their agency or who they know. So you might see a property listed with several different agencies just because they know that there's no crossover in showing those properties. I also utilize social media, especially when it comes to rental property. You'll find on Facebook groups such as Homes for Rent in Budapest or Homes for Rent in Antalya. It's a great resource. I can tell you that I found most of my listings that I've stayed at on those sites. Things you'll want to know about your real estate agent, and that is, what is their experience working with foreigners? Do they speak your language fluently? Are they flexible in understanding the circumstances in which you are navigating? What is their relationship with the property owners? Because let me tell you, this experience is going to be so much different than where you came from. You want to make sure upfront that you clarify any fees that will be expected by the agent. Once you determine the agent that you want to work with, collect the contact information and keep it with you at all times. Because as you drive around the city, you will see properties listed maybe on the wall or on the window stating it's either for rent or for sale. That may be something you're interested in, and you want to be able to say, hey, I found this property, can you see if we can see it? Let me quickly explain to you my experience of seeing properties in Turkey as well as in Hungary. That is something that's out of the ordinary, and I wished I would have known more. So for example, you see a property that's for rent, has the agent's name on it, their phone number. You call your agent and you say, hey, I want to see this property. That agent calls this other person, schedules a meetup time. They all have to show up to show you the property. There isn't no lockbox on the door where they can just walk you in. It's a little bit more complicated. It takes a lot more time and effort to see properties. So unlike in the United States where you can say, agent, I want to see X, Y, and Z properties, and they can basically show you all those probably within an hour, if not longer. In other countries, it takes a lot more time because that other person you're counting on that owns the property has to show up. Your agent has to show up. You have to be there. You'll also learn that your agent may only have a set of properties listed, and it's very hard for them to show you a property outside their listing territory because some other agent has it. So you may have to switch and go to that agent to go look at that listing. So don't feel like you're offending them because you're not. It's just the way that the dynamics are set up in that country. Let me talk about some pros and cons of renting versus buying a home. The pros of rental is that you have a lot more flexibility. You get to this country, you live there a year, and you say, this really isn't for me. I don't think this is going to work out. You can terminate your lease and move back, right? Very simple. I always recommend to start out with renting. And the reason why I say that is because it's really hard to get a true understanding of the city or the village or wherever you're living until you actually live in it. When I first moved to Turkey, I lived in the downtown area of the city. It was the old part of the city, and I loved the cobblestone streets, the narrow alleyways, all that good stuff, right? But once I got down there and was living amongst that, it's a very high touristy area. It's very hard to get to and from other parts of the city. I decided this is really not for me. So at the end of our lease, we moved out of that area and moved to a different area. It's hard to know all that and experience that until you're actually living in it. So I always tell everyone, rent first, then buy. But don't feel like you're stuck. The other benefit I would say is that it's a low initial cost. In other words, you're not pouring in all your savings, all your investment into a property. Some countries, especially if you're new to that country, they're going to probably require more than just a 1-month rent up front. But for whatever reason, that's still cheaper than the investment of the property. You also are free from maintenance issues. And what I mean by that is, yes, little small fixes here and there is your responsibility. But for example, water tank leak, they are very good about coming and fixing it because it's their property. In rental property, you can choose between having it furnished and unfurnished. Good and bad in both of those scenarios. I've experienced both. You may have some limits on modifications if you rent. For example, if you wanted to paint all the walls blue, your property owner might say, no, you can't do that. Or you want to change something in the house that maybe is more fitting for you. You really have to agree with that property owner to make those adjustments. The con also can be economy. Here in Turkey, when the Russian-Ukraine war broke out, property went sky high here. Now, it was great if you owned it and you wanted to turn around and sell it, but if you were a renter, it was very difficult to find property that was reasonable to move into because the demand was so high and there just wasn't enough properties available. The pros, owning a property can give you residency permits easier than rental property. The cons will be obviously you're limited to your investment, so you've got to stick with it. You're dealing with all the maintenance and navigating the language barrier of maintaining that property, which is challenging. There's good and bad, obviously, to that situation. The economy can crash, and here you are stuck with this piece of property that's devalued, and that also is not good for you. So these are some things that you just have to take into consideration. Let's begin by talking about renting. And now, I did stress earlier, I prefer that everyone initially start out just renting property. I feel that that's the best way to go about learning how to live abroad. But again, these are some things that you have to weigh out for yourself. Things you need to check when you decide to rent: examine the property, make note of anything that you see is damaged or needs to be fixed. Most definitely sit down with a real estate lawyer because you need to sign a contract. Don't do a handshake, don't do a verbal agreement. Get a document, make sure it's notarized, it's translated into the language that you can read before you sign anything. Make sure that your real estate lawyer or whoever's reviewing that document document with you explains that entire document, because let me tell you, there were so many people that signed contracts, especially here in Turkey, that there was one line item that said at such and such time frame, we can reassess your rate, and therefore whatever the going rate is, we can change your rate. These are some things that you don't know because you've not experienced that before, and you need someone to help you through that process. I would ask, how available are apartments? Is it easy to rent here, or is there a limited number of apartments? So when you see one, you either need to decide that you want it, put down the money, or do you have some time to play around with it? What is the length of the lease? That's something you'll want to find out. Is it 1 year? For example, we sign a lease here, but it's good for 10 years at the rate that we signed it at. Now, each year, the government does an assessment of inflation, and the rate goes up according to the inflation. But for the most part, they can't go from, say, charging you $500 a month to $2,000 a month. But you are guaranteed that rate for 10 years. Not every country works that way. Budapest, it's a year-to-year rate agreement, so you have to reassess it every year. You'll want to know, what are the initial costs within your rental property? Is there building fees or parking fees or maintenance fees that you have to pay up front? What is included in that rental agreement rate? Water, sewer, electricity, all those things. Find out if the documents all have to be translated. They may not, but you should still continue to have it translated because you need to be able to read it. If your lease is year to year, can you negotiate the rate every time, or is it just a set rate and you have to pay it? Find out if there's any housing regulations in your neighborhood. For some apartment complexes here where you can't have a barbecue or grill. Find out what those regulations are, because you don't want to mess up and say, okay, I didn't know. And he says, well, too bad, you're out. You have to move out of your apartment. With your lawyer, I would sit down and ask, what is the rights of the landlord and what are my rights? Before moving on, I highly suggest that you subscribe to my channel, as I will continue to provide you with more information about moving and living abroad. I hope you find this information helpful. Please click the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up so that I can continue to spread this knowledge about moving and living abroad. Stay tuned, because at the end of this video, I will provide you with a downloadable document. You'll find it in the description box that will guide you into the rental or buying process. The next thing we want to talk about in renting property is a furnished or an unfurnished property. I also believe that when you initially move to that country, it's much easier for you to rent a furnished apartment, because navigating purchasing all the items that you need in your apartment is very complicated if you don't speak the language there. When I first moved to Turkey, our apartment was fully furnished. Granted, the furniture was not the best quality furniture, but it got us through the year. And then once we lived there, we knew what we wanted in our apartment. Now, I know a lot of people think, oh, well, I'll have all my stuff shipped abroad. Well, there's a problem with that. And one is the size of things in Europe, Turkey, pretty much everywhere around the world is much smaller in size. So that nice fluffy couch you have is too big for your living room. You have to find something that's more fitting for that space. Also, bed sizing is very different here. You know, there's certain kitchen tools you might want to bring, but for the most part, everything can be bought here locally, and it's usually much cheaper than what you paid in the United States. Now, granted, electronics is a little higher here, but for the most part, rebuilding your life in a new country, the whole point of it is to kind of get rid of the old and start with new. Sell your stuff in the US, rebuild your life in the new country, and downsize. You don't need 5 sets of plates or this mixing bowl with that mixing bowl. You need a few, but your lifestyle is going to be different. So take that into consideration. The convenience of having a furnished apartment is that when your lease is up and you want to move, you don't have to deal with things. We're in the process right now of considering moving to Hungary. And so we're trying to decide, okay, do we look at taking this stuff with us, having it shipped, or do we just sell it all and be done with it? All of those factors play into owning furniture, so you have to take that into consideration. Now, the advantage of an unfurnished apartment is that obviously you get to go out and select your design, what you like, all that good stuff. But again, a language barrier is probably going to be your biggest hang up because most of these furniture stores are not going to have someone there who speaks your language. You'll need to find out, if you do go that route, how they deliver it, all those processes. First moved into this unfurnished apartment, it was right after COVID. Things were 6-7 months out before we could get them into our apartment. So it's not like the United States where you walk into a furniture store and just, oh, I want that. And they go in the back, get a box, bring it to you. It doesn't work that way. So just know that. Last but not least, about renting. Once you've narrowed down the questions you want to ask about the property, be aware of the conditions of the property. Air conditioning units don't come with the house. Window curtains or shades don't come with the house. Refrigerators, appliances, washing machine, dryer, all of those things typically don't come with the house unless it's a furnished apartment. So those are things that you need to be aware of. Find out what is included in your rent. Like I talked about earlier, is there additional fees that you're going to have to pay monthly? Who do you pay? Kind of look about your neighborhood. Ask the real estate agent, do you know anything about the neighbors in my building? What is the age group? Does everybody have kids? Is there a barking dog that you've heard about in the neighborhood? All these things can be a factor of your daily life if they're too noisy. You'll also want to find out, what is the average cost of electricity in that building? What's the average gas bill? What's the average water bill? They won't be able to give you anything very specific, but at least they can give you a range to what you're expected to pay. Find out about, where do you dispose trash? Is there a trash dumpster on the property? Where do you dump your trash, and how is it handled in your building? If you have deliveries come to your apartment, how do they get to your apartment? For example, here in Turkey, you have to buzz at the front door to get up to the elevator of our property. So you need to find out all of those things as well about your property. Final thing, if you decide to rent, please sit down with a lawyer to review your documents and make sure that everything is kosher for you and you fully understand what you're signing. Expat Toolkits offers helpful information about the process of moving and living abroad. I suggest you go back to the beginning. I have several videos that start out with making decisions about moving abroad. How do you pick the right country that fits for you? Many different videos that talk about moving and living abroad. I would recommend that you go back and look at those if you haven't done so. It will give you some good tips and information about this process. But one thing I can't stress enough is about going on a scouting trip, and I've also made a video about that. This is a really important part of deciding where to live, what's best fit for you, and how to navigate throughout the other elements of living abroad. I'll leave all the links below in the description box for you to go back and look at those videos. Now moving forward to buying property. Again, I'm going to suggest renting first, but if buying property is high on your list, then let's talk about it. This is where your real estate agent is key factor in a lot of this. You want an agent that understands foreign contracts or agreements. You want a real estate agent that can explain all the ins and outs of owning property, taxes. You'll need to know just basic owning property systems. And this is where your real estate agent is key. They are key to connecting you with other people as well as guiding you through the process. The pros and cons of owning property is, the pros are, it's an investment. It may get you citizenship. It's a way to build up equity into a property, although it takes a long time. And it also kind of gives you comfort, I would say, that you're not going to have to relocate anytime soon. The cons, obviously, is it sucks up all your investment into a property. So you're responsible for all the maintenance. You're responsible to figure all the ins and outs of owning that property. And that can be a little stressful as well. Navigating owning property is difficult while you're living in your own country, but much less living in a foreign country. Just realize that this is going to be a little bit more of a challenge for you than probably you anticipated. If you're leaning towards owning property, here are some questions I suggest that you ask. What's included in the property? What inspections have been done on the property? What does the deed say? Who's the owner on the deed of that property? How often has that property changed hands? Where's the property lines according to the deed, the layout of that land? How long does it take for the previous owner to transition that property into your name? What is the process for that? What is the taxes owed on that property, or what are the taxes you're going to be responsible for on that property? What are the legal aspects of owning that property that you need to ask your lawyer? Is the bones or the structure of that property good? Has it passed all the inspections? Has the city gave it its stamp of approval? What is the closing process of taking over that property? You know, in the United States, you have closing fees. What will happen once you get to that point in owning that property? Transitioning all the electric, the water, the sewer, all of that into your name needs to also be talked about. Will this property grant you citizenship? Here in Turkey, a lot of people went out and bought properties in different neighborhoods, only to find out that those particular neighborhoods were restricted for earning citizenship. So be aware of that. Ask your real estate agent, ask the lawyer, will I be able to gain citizenship by owning property in this neighborhood or in this location? Find out from your lawyer or your real estate agent, what do you need to put down a certain deposit? Are you paying all cash? How does that transaction need to happen? Do you have to set up a bank account and funnel all that money through a local bank account for them to give it to the seller of that property? Find out all of those details. That will make the transition go much smoother. Again, I'm going to remind you that I've offered you a downloadable guide that will talk about these things and help you through the process of either renting a property or owning a property. You can print it out and take it with you so you'll have a list of questions in front of you to ask as you make that transition into either renting or owning property. I hope you find this information helpful. I know there's a lot of details that go into a lot of this aspect of owning a property. It's probably a lot more intense. I don't own any property either in Turkey nor in Hungary. Personally, I feel like renting is the best route for us, but that's my decision, and you need to figure out what's best for you. I would highly suggest reaching out to other expats to talk about if any of them have owned property, what was their process like. They're great to gather information from or recommendations. The key here, there will be your real estate agent, finding a good lawyer that can help you through this process, because you're going to spend a lot of time at the government office, at lawyers' offices, trying to figure out all this paperwork. Don't let the stress of this move litigate the outcome. Because yes, renting a property or owning a property is difficult, just as it is in the United States. But if you really want to live abroad, you just need to roll with it, accept the situation, and do your best. You're going to make mistakes, don't get me wrong, but that's just part of the process. I know for us, we utilized our relocation service agent who helped us connect us with a real estate agent, and she was fabulous. So I can't say enough about that experience. Whether you decide to rent or buy, a home is waiting for you abroad. I wish you the best. I hope you have a great experience at this process. Again, if you have any questions or you want me to give you some other information about any other videos I have, please reach out to me or message me and I'll be glad to help. Don't forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up at the end of this video. It is so important for me. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining me. Have a great afternoon.